to heart, talk to talk, when everything seems to fall apart. Say heart to heart, it's time to talk. Let me hear you say those words on replay.
Wow, 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 wow.
Okay, vocals.
Yes. I was feeling myself a little bit. I ain't got no vocals, but it's okay.
It's all right.
So, y'all, welcome back to the Lipstick Den.
All right.
Yeah, you heard that D voice. All right. In the building, we got somebody special. Yes. So just to let you know, you guys, we last weekend was able to go to something called the Masculine Experience.
Yes.
It was amazing.
Culture Encounters and what's the night?
Yes.
Networking
nights.
Yes.
Culture Encounters, networking nights. And you guys, it was just a panel of some wonderful, powerful men who was just letting us know about the feedback and the things that's going on in our county, things that's going on in the cities and all over. And they just wanted to, be advocates for our men, but women were there.
Yes.
That's right.
It
And
was
along the way, we was able to meet someone named Jon Hollis.
Yes.
Oh,
He was in the building.
I was.
I was there.
I remember.
So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am running for Congress here in Dallas, in District 32 against Colin Allred. A little bit about myself. I was a Christian missionary down in Latin America and Germany for a while.
Okay.
And then when I came back, I became the program director for a nonprofit where we started after-school programs for at-risk youth in some of the worst areas of town. Got them away from gangs, away from drugs, and away from some terrible kind of family environments, and helped them with their education, helped them focus on their studies, and just tried to help uplift their lives a little bit.
All right.
And after that, I jumped into TV and film. Where I spent 10 and a half years doing that. I started off making videos about human trafficking and PSAs. I was with a group up there, actually up in Canada, where we started doing that. And then I moved to Hollywood and started working with major studios like Fox, Warner Brothers, NBC, ABC,
Nice.
pretty much anyone you can think of.
Yeah.
And then I decided to jump into politics.
All right.
Wow, one life to live.
Yes.
Right.
I don't got much time to play around. So.
Right. No, seriously.
Well, we on your time. 'Cause we don't got that time either.
So originally you were a candidate in California?
Yeah, so what had happened was I had started getting involved out there in the political realm because I wasn't seeing the type of representation that I think was good enough. We see our representatives on TV a lot, kind of same platitudes and rhetoric and never really addressing what their districts believe and what their people need.
Okay.
And so I started making my rounds, and originally I had decided to run against Adam Schiff, and very early on. And I went to a GOP event where I came out as a conservative, and I said that I supported President Trump, and within 24 hours, I got a text message saying that I was being fired from my job.
So, yes, I was about to ask, because you're a Trump supporter.
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Well, I support a lot of the policies that the administration has put forth, and I like to again cut through all the rhetoric and get to the details of things and why certain policies are being put forth. That area of the country doesn't like to look at details; they like to look at kind of whether you have a D or an R next to your name. And so coming to Texas was actually kind of natural for me. I have family out here. I've been coming here most of my life. Gotcha. And when I thought about, okay, where's a great place where I can go to, kind of kick off a new chapter in my life, Dallas was natural because it's the #1 growing metropolitan area in the United States. And when I got here, I noticed the same thing, representatives that don't really represent their people.
Yep.
They represent themselves. And when I looked at the Republican field, I didn't see anyone I liked, to be perfectly honest. And there's a couple of good people that I'm running against, but at the end of the day, there's no attention to detail. There is this kind of club mentality within the party, where if you're not part of their club, then they don't want anything to do with you.
Well, then let me ask you a question. So what areas exactly fall under 32nd District?
It's pretty big. It starts in Uptown, and it goes north up to, North Dallas, far North Dallas, Richardson, Garland, Wiley, Saxe, Rowlett, and a small sliver of Mesquite that they kind of drew in there.
Yeah, like the Collin County and Dallas County areas.
It's all Dallas County. There's a small portion of Collin County up near LBJ. and it's real small. There's probably 50 people that are in that area.
And are you familiar with the demographics that are in that area?
Yeah, so it's pretty wide ranging. I mean, there's somewhere around 62% or so that that fall under some sort of minority category. We're seeing a huge increase in the Latino population. They're about a quarter of the population. What's interesting is it's still a very red district.
Yeah.
The Republican votes outweigh the Democratic votes by about 115,000 to 85,000. But there's a lot of swing voters in the middle, people who don't necessarily fall on either side of the aisle, and they're looking, at the person, and they want to get involved. And what we saw in 2018 is Pete Sessions lost to Colin Allred, and he lost about 40 or 50,000 votes from his average, which was a big shock to everyone because they thought he was a shoo-in, and he had always averaged around 160, 170,000 votes.
If you don't mind, Congressman.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we are live and we're speaking to an audience.
Of course.
So we do have some questions lined up.
Okay.
Because I do feel like we want to speak to our people.
Definitely.
We have some questions. So Chantel, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Well, really quick for me personally, can you clarify the difference of a Democrat and a Republican? Because I know, like just generally when I hear it and people around me, when we hear Democrat, we kind of associate it with a black vote. And when we hear Republican, we associate it with a white vote. Yeah. Can you, is there a clarification that you can give for those different beliefs on what each one is?
For sure. And it's interesting that you say that because what we've found is, a lot of people vote one way because their parents or their grandparents voted that way, and it just kind of goes down the family line.
Yeah.
But when you start to break down the issues, you start to realize I might not be what I thought. And one of the biggest differences between Democrats and Republicans, or at least, what we like to say is that Democrats believe in bigger government, Republicans believe in smaller government, meaning I don't want the federal government involved in as many things as they are. And obviously it's gotten a little out of hand. Both sides over the years have allowed bills to come through that has increased the federal government, increased the budget, increased the deficit. But at the end of the day, true conservatives believe that we have states' rights. Most issues should be solved by the states, and by the local municipalities. And the federal government should just kind of be an overseer, making sure that everything is handled correctly. On the Democratic side, they believe the federal government does a better job at things. Yeah, and we don't really see that. You look at healthcare, for example. Healthcare has been destroyed by the federal government. Ever since they stepped in, it's just kind of thrown everything into chaos. Same thing with education. Same thing with, all kinds of different things that we're facing today.
So just overall, as you're speaking in regards to that, just letting the audience know, it's not based off of the color. I think a lot of times growing up is how we were raised, but no one really knew the meaning behind it. Yeah. So now we know Democrats is more for the government handling things, and when the Republicans are trying to be more conservative to have it handled in the states. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And I truly believe in the saying that you can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, and you can teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. And that's kind of a conservative mindset as well, because once again we're not looking to rely on the government for everything. We want to rely on ourselves and rely on our communities.
Gotcha. So I would like to know, just because I know you was talking about the 32nd district, but we were reading in regards to what the general population of the 32nd district is. And as I stated, 42% is white.
Yeah.
And the rest is 58% is colored.
Yes. Yeah. Approximately.
Right.
Yeah, and we'll find out. We'll find out more details after the census. Obviously, that's a big thing, which I would implore everyone to be a part of the census, because that's how we get our resources as well. It's how the federal government knows how to allocate resources to different states. It also kind of helps states determine how many representatives that they have.
Okay.
So this time around, Texas will be kind of gaining a few.
Gotcha. Okay. Talking about race and talking about the brown people versus white people, I mean, it's just the world we live in.
Yeah.
So to me, this is the first time that I've really been able to talk to a congressman that is white.
Soon to be congressman.
Soon to be congressman, right? Okay, so why is the brown vote so important when it comes to Republicans? And also, why do you feel like it's so important? Because I know you were at the masculine experience.
Yes.
You're here now.
With us.
What is it that you feel like is so important for the brown vote to realize? And the brown vote isn't just African Americans.
Yeah.
Right.
It is the issues that are happening with Trump.
Yeah.
You know, Hispanics, just other cultures, Asia, India.
Yeah.
You know, the world we live. I mean, you came from California.
Yeah, originally.
So you're very familiar with diversity.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely.
I have
And
a lot of
so-
diversity in my family,
So
too.
that diversity
Okay.
has come into Dallas, and it's very diverse. You know, so what can you say to brown people or people of color or just different backgrounds of life?
Absolutely.
You know, why is that so important for you personally?
Well, one thing is over the years, there's been a lot of race baiting when it comes to politics. You know, and that's kind of why you find a lot of minorities have gone over to the Democratic Party, because it was, you know, they were handling themselves in such a way to where they were very specifically trying to get that vote. I think it's important to. I think the minority vote is extremely important because, one, I think a lot of those people don't necessarily know the differences between the parties. It comes back to, you know, I vote this way because of X, Y, and Z. And then there's a lot of emotional-based arguments that both sides play on, you know, where, you know, instead of getting into the details of policy, instead of getting into the details of history, you know, they kind of paint with a broad brush to get people riled up. And I don't think that that's the correct way to go after things. I think people in general want the details. They want to understand what's actually happening, especially nowadays with the way that information flows. And what we've seen, especially, you know, during President Trump's time, is we've seen a massive shift of minorities coming into the Republican Party like I've never seen in my lifetime. And a lot of that is due to the fact that they've started looking into what conservatives actually believe and what they stand for, and they've started to realize, like, oh, I actually agree with this. And that itself doesn't have anything to do with the president necessarily, other than the fact that he is this such, you know, larger than life character that it forces people to look.
Right.
But eventually there's going to be a day after President Trump. And that day is coming faster than we all realize. You know, 4 years goes by like that. Yeah. So whether it's this cycle or the next cycle, there will be another time. And that's what we have to focus on, is what do we do as a community, as Americans, you know, when this kind of larger than life character gets out of the way and, you know, the Congress is able to actually go back to work.
Right.
You know, who do we want representing us?
Real quick, ladies, I know you'll have another question, but I just want one more question.
Yeah,
Okay, no, we done. You coming from California, what was your upbringing? Were you raised around people of color? Were you,
Yes. Yeah.
you know, can you relate? You know, because I feel like that is the voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just a little bit about my family. I'm the oldest of 8. I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers, and it's a little crazy. And a lot of my family are second or third generation Latinos who came here legally. I'm not. My mom and dad had me, and then they, you know, went their separate ways and started different families. I have, you know, cousins that I shared bedrooms with that are African American.
Wow.
I have a grandfather who's 3/4 Cherokee. I'm not going to claim that I'm Cherokee like Elizabeth Warren. I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
But I was raised around diversity of all kinds. And what was interesting was my father's side of the family was all conservative. My mother's side of the family was all liberal. And now my mother's side of the family has all become conservative, which is very weird to me.
But you had to find a balance growing up.
Exactly. I was always right in that middle ground, and that's kind of where I've always stayed as well. Is I'm able to see kind of both sides of the argument. I obviously lean right, but I understand, you know, where everyone's coming from, or at least I try to, because I think we need to. There oftentimes we get caught up on our teams,
Yeah.
you know, and it becomes like this football game. You
Well,
know?
speaking of teams and football game, you know, it's Super Bowl weekend.
It is.
Hey, so who are you going for? Who are you rooting for
Well,
right now? If we
I'm
may
I'm
ask?
definitely going for the 49ers. That's
Got a 49ers in the building.
my grandfather's got a picture of Jerry Rice hanging up in his office. So
Okay.
yeah, so you know, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you know, you can't go against them.
What you got to say?
So who's the other team? I don't watch
Oh, okay.
The Chiefs.
Okay. 49ers.
I got the 49ers.
Look, don't feel bad.
right.
I only found out today when we all had to play games.
Yeah, I just found out last week. I thought the Super Bowl was in the fall. And my friend was like, that's what Cowboy fans would have you thinking. So Cowboy fans, that's what he said. He said that. I didn't say that.
Why you repeat it? Don't do that.
Okay,
He
well,
said it.
I'm glad to know that you're going for the 49ers. So as
Yep.
you guys know, Mr. Hollis here is a 49ers fan.
Yes, ma'am.
Stand up. All right.
So what do you feel like you'd be able to do differently that our current Congress isn't already doing?
Well, I think that's getting to work. I mean, I've spent my entire life doing nothing but work. I mean, I decided very early on that I didn't want to fall behind. You know, I didn't want to get to being 30 and looking back going, oh man, I gotta get to work and do, you know, what am I doing? And so early on, you know, I made it I made a concerted effort to make sure that I was working as hard as I could in whatever I was doing. And even if I didn't, you know, at the time I didn't know where I was going to land. And that's something that you don't see a lot of in Congress. You know, a lot of these people, they get kind of sucked up into the system. They spend careers working in politics.
Yeah.
And the way the government works is it's a natural bureaucracy, which forces it to slow down and take its
They
time.
kind of stop working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not a slow roller. Like, I like to go. Like, let's get this done.
Fast roller, yes.
Exactly. And I soak up information like a sponge. And so, you know, even though, you know, you may not be a healthcare professional or an education professional, I look at the details of everything, and I look at both sides and figure out, okay, where's the middle ground? How do we solve this? How do we get both sides back to the table?
Right.
And there's not a lot of bipartisanship going on these days. You know, Colin Allred talked a big game about bipartisanship, but when you look at his voting record, it's been right down the party line every single step of the way. And bipartisanship isn't just having meetings with the other side or hanging out with the other side, which, you know, we see him doing. Bipartisanship is getting people in a room and not leaving that room until you figure out a way to solve an issue.
Yeah.
Now,
And
real quick, if you don't mind me asking, just because I know you're coming into this, how old are you?
I'm 30.
You're 30.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whew.
You don't, you know, I'm a little older than you, you know, but
Step my
what I'm
game up.
saying is, step my game.
I'm a little older
That's beautiful because you're
It
starting
is.
early,
Yes.
and I could tell the maturity level, but I kind of figured you were younger, and you don't get a lot of that.
at all.
And
Yeah.
when you said that just made me think, like, how old is he?
Yeah, and honestly, you know, I want young people to get involved in the process. You know, I was fortunate enough. I grew up with parents and with grandparents who loved to talk about politics. They, you know, I would drive around with my grandfather listening to talk radio, and he would have me call in when I was a teenager and give my opinion, no matter where it was at, which was an interesting experience, to say the least. And so I was always aware kind of what was going on the national stage and locally as well. And one thing I notice nowadays is young people, they get so discouraged by the system and by the process. And I keep hearing, you know, my vote doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's the one equalizer we have in this country, because every single person in this country has one vote.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how many friends you have, how many resources you have one vote. And so if you're able to utilize that vote the way that you want and you know, have your voice be out there, then, you know, no matter what happens, at least you can say that you tried.
Yeah, I just think that it's so important who we vote for, though.
It is. Yeah. It is.
And earlier you did state that, you know, you were for Trump.
Yes.
So what about his beliefs, and what do you feel about the impeachment?
So I've watched pretty much every congressional hearing since they started doing hearings trying to impeach him from essentially day one. A major issue that I have with it is the lack of true evidence and the lack of follow through on the House's side. So there's a lot of talk right now. There's a lot of rhetoric about you know, witnesses in the Senate trial, and they want these new witnesses to come up. But the problem is the House had an opportunity to bring those witnesses in front of them. There is a subpoena process that you subpoena someone. If they deny that subpoena, you take them to court and you allow the courts to decide. And they skipped that process. They didn't want to go through the subpoena process. They, for some reason, the House gave themselves a deadline of we're going to do this impeachment by this date, and they stuck to that. But when you look at the case, it's lacking in so much detail, and it's lacking in actual firsthand knowledge. They had somewhere around 17 witnesses that they did call in, 16 of which did not have firsthand knowledge of the phone call. The one person who did, his name was Gordon Sondland. He said that he talked directly to the president. The president told him, "I don't want anything. I don't want any quid pro quo. Make him do the right, or tell him to do the right thing." And another thing that people don't realize about the Ukraine, excuse me, is in 2017 and 2018 we released the aid. Right, no issues. 2019, something else happened. A new president was elected in the Ukraine, and he was a comedian that had never done anything in the public realm. He had played the president on TV. And so the Ukraine is considered one of the most corrupt governments in the world. Even the Obama administration said that. And so now you have a comedian get elected that has no experience and no connections, and he has to form a cabinet, and then they have to form a parliament because they're a parliamentary system. The parliament wasn't going to be finalized until mid-September, which ironically is when the aid was released. So here you have a president looking at this situation going, okay, we're going to give them billions of dollars in aid, and we're going to give them lethal aid, which means that we're going to give them weapons to fight against the Russians that have invaded their country. And he's looking at it going, well, let's wait and see how this guy plays out. And that is within his scope.
Who are you speaking of again?
The Ukrainian president.
Okay, so could you connect that back to the impeachment?
So that's what the impeachment's about.
Oh, okay.
Is this phone call?
Making sure.
Yeah, this phone call with Ukraine, where he was talking about investigations that had to do with corruption, because there's been a lot of corruption in that country, especially with a Burisma, the gas company, which is run by an oligarch who has been known for years to be extremely corrupt. And it just so happens that the vice president's son was serving on their board while he was vice president.
Oh,
and
wow.
that was Joe Biden's son. So there's a lot of details that are missing in the impeachment trial. And the Republicans have tried to bring those to light. And another major issue about the impeachment trial is the Republicans were not allowed to call their own witnesses. For the first time in impeachment history, they were not allowed to call their own witnesses.
So as it goes on, are they just basically changing laws to skip over the impeachment?
They're not changing laws, but they are circumventing the precedence that's been set by other impeachment trials. But so if you look at like the Bill Clinton impeachment trial, it ran a completely different way.
It did.
It was based on the law. It was based on both sides got to call witnesses. Both sides had attorneys present during the House portion of it. Both sides got to ask whatever questions that they wanted to ask.
It was fair.
Exactly. This time around, Adam Schiff made it very clear how the rules were going to go, and he controlled the entire process. And
that's who you're running or originally running against in California, right?
That's who I was going to. Yeah, and then life changed.
Yeah.
So with you going towards Trump, what do you love about him? What is it? Because sometimes media will put out there what they want to.
Of course.
So sometimes, what has he done? What has Trump positively have done?
How long have you followed him?
How? Yeah. So because we see the negative things,
of course,
or personally how we view the negative things, which is reality. Which people watching the show, the things that's going on with Mexico and these immigrants. And children being taken away from their parents.
Yes.
So what is it about that situation that has people against Trump? Or, just give us your viewpoint on that.
Well, to address the child separation policy, that's been a policy for the past 2 or 3 administrations. It didn't start with President Trump. It was a policy that was implemented before him, and it was implemented during President Obama's time as well. There's actually pictures of President Obama's national security advisor walking by the same cages, as they put it, during his administration. So what's interesting about coming from the media sphere and seeing how they message things, they control the narrative because they're the only ones making it.
Yeah.
There isn't much of a balance in news or in TV and film. And like during the 2016 election, 92% of all media coverage about President Trump was negative. So there was no balance.
I could see that.
It was just a constant attack.
Yeah.
And there's a big reason for that. It's because he is technically a political outsider, and he switched sides, and they don't like that, right? He was a Democrat most of his life. He was giving to all kinds of different, giving money to all kinds of different candidates, and he kind of understands how that side works. And then he switches over to the Republican side. He takes that party by storm. Which no one expected. And, then both sides kind of came out and it was a huge backlash. What I appreciate about his administration is the policies that he's putting into place. They're really focused on us as a whole. We've seen the economy shoot through the roof like we've never seen before. And the growth that we've seen in the economy it could have been done during the Obama administration.
Economy, like
jobs, the unemployment rate, the stock market going through the roof, all that kind of stuff. And that portion of the economy, it was kind of slow rolled by the Obama administration. There was a lot more room for growth during his administration, and for some reason it never took shape. And then the president came in, he deregulated a lot of things because regulation is one of the biggest killers of economics. And he brought a lot of attention back to business. He gave business owners the opportunity to really help their economy again. What we saw before the
so real quick, because I know you were going to go further into the business owner's side, but just switching up a little bit. You're young.
Yes.
We're talking a lot about the adults, but I think coming up in our community now, our children and our youth is what we need to focus on as far as them growing up into knowing exactly what politics is and everything. So what is it that they can look at you for, and what is it that you're bringing to the table to
better our youth?
Yeah.
Well, I literally came from nothing. I was raised in some of the worst neighborhoods in my hometown. I watched, friends, family get involved in gangs, get involved in drugs, get involved in pretty much every bad thing imaginable. I didn't want that for my life. My parents didn't want that for my life. And I, during the financial crisis, both my parents lost houses. They lost their cars, lost their jobs. My mom was fired for redundancy. My father lost his company during a corporate buyout. And, we lost our health care as well. And then I was smart enough to go skiing and shatter my femur without health care.
Oh, man.
And so then I had to deal, I had to deal with all of that, with dealing with government health care, dealing with the healthcare system as a whole, and kind of, wondering, are we going to be able to survive this? Because, thousands of dollars worth of bills are coming in. You're going like, what are we going to do? And we were fortunate enough, the community kind of rallied behind us. They helped us quite a bit. We got a nonprofit involved that helped out.
Okay.
And
so good.
When it comes to our youth, especially youth that are struggling, I understand that struggle.
Educational system.
Yeah, and I went to all public schools. I put myself through college.
Okay.
That was a big thing for me, and I got into one of the most difficult industries on the face of this planet, and succeeded at it. And that was through sheer work ethic and will.
So if you become congressman, when it comes to Frisco ISD versus
Dallas
ISD,
right?
And the difference that it has when it comes to the people, even in those jurisdictions, and giving them money and what they do with it, and how it's not going back. That's my personal belief. How it's not going back to the children, and how it's profiting their trips and other stuff like that. With being a congressman, how do you affect those roles when it comes to the money and the differences between they having a better education versus...
Especially in the 32nd District, because you have both sides.
Yes, right? We do have both sides. And so we have, within the 32nd District, there are, good examples and bad examples. I think the biggest thing is you have to get the federal government out of the way. They're way too involved in education. Common Core was a disaster. STAR testing is a disaster as well, because there's this race.
You're so right.
Yeah, there's this race for making sure you making sure that you get the best score on a test, as opposed to actually taking in the information that you're learning.
Yeah.
And
Life learning skills.
exactly.
But
And
not only that, like when I was in school, we had like the DARE program to kind of help
Yeah.
with kids who, just wasn't always
Yep.
on point. I guess
just
to
say no.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like bringing something like that back?
I love the dare.
Yeah, I mean,
I did too. It's amazing.
I like the shirts.
Dare.
exactly. Yeah.
Dare.
It's funny. Dare's still around.
Really?
They're not as prominent anymore, and I'm not sure why. But they are. I have seen them, kind of around.
Okay.
But yeah, we need more of those outreach programs.
Yeah.
That is a local issue, but I think as a congressman, you are kind of the leader of the political leaders within the district, because you're at the highest level, and that's one thing that we've been lacking in so much representation are our Congress people coming back and being that leader with all of the community. I think we need more. First, we need to reform how our school systems work. There's a lot of great ideas out there, but it has to be localized. It has to come back to the states. This whole kind of standardized, standardized requirements, kind of across the board.
standard.
I do have friends who are teachers, and they do say that that's one thing that they can't stand.
Yeah.
Is because teachers, they specialize in their gift.
Exactly.
And how they naturally teach. But because of the state of Texas, they have to go by these regulations, and they have to teach one way.
Yeah.
And it kind of hurts them a little bit, because they're like, we don't, they know how to get to their student based on their natural abilities that they went to school for.
Yeah.
And
So
I think
speaking on the difference between the federal government or the government being involved in education versus the state or locally, do you think that would make a difference in teaching like life lessons in school versus teaching how to go to college, get a job, and just live in this matrix?
Love that question.
Yeah, I think once you get back kind of to the local level where now you're not worried about the federal government kind of watching over you. Like No Child Left Behind was another policy where it's like we just
policy.
it felt like they were just over the top of you all the time. And if you didn't perform, then you were going to lose your funding, you're going to lose your job, all these things were going to happen. And I think I remember when I was in school, our teachers focused on the curriculum that they put forth based on what specific area that they were teaching, and there was always time in there for them to come in and be kind of an example for you to help you through whatever you were going through. I'm not sure if that exists as much today, because there's so much focus on getting everyone ready for tests and things. But I think kind of working with the local officials to retool our curriculum, so it's not just learn this as fast as you can, pass a test, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. And more focused on, how do we serve our children better? How do we get them prepared, not only for transitioning out of high school, but how do we get them prepared for life as an adult?
General, absolutely.
And teaching them things like balancing a checkbook, doing taxes,
learning about credit,
exactly.
And
I wish someone would have told me, exactly. Stocks. That's a good
Yeah.
investment.
I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to know.
Exactly. How to utilize technology to create your own business.
Because it's a system that's built, but it's 2020 now.
Right.
So you still want us to manage a system that was built
years ago.
Over 100 years ago. In this 2020, we're doing different things.
Times have changed and changed again.
We got to learn
everything.
The new. They have to bring everything to the 2020 and not leave it back there. But that's what's been hard for us, because now we have to do so much research, and the research is old.
Our last episode was generational curses. Cycles. I feel like that's a cycle within America, just as a whole, absolutely. And that's one I feel like should definitely be broken.
That's a good question, though. When it comes to the history of politics, do you feel like that's a generational cycle or a generational curse? And do you feel like it's changing? Because I do feel, I don't know if you believe wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. I don't know if you agree with everything that's going on with politics. But just sitting here with you, I do feel like there's a little bit of honesty with you. There's a little bit of
I can sense that.
You know, not the grandfather type of mentality.
Right.
You know?
I got this from passed on down.
I was skeptical because I'm like, why? You know, just old head.
Yeah.
Even though I'm 33. Why the brown? Why the brown? But to me, I feel like I need to work on that too. You know, I can't be narrow-minded.
For sure.
Because we are growing, even in politics.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't want to mess up a good thing. I have children. So when it comes to you, like, do you feel like with our politics, is it a generational curse? Do you feel
Our
like
cycle.
we can come our cycle? Do you feel like we can come out of it a little bit?
I do. I mean, right now, you know, you have kind of a clash that's happening in the political realm where you have a lot of people that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, and then you have new people coming in that are really just kind of knocking things over, and it's causing a lot of chaos.
Friction.
And a lot of friction.
Fighting back and forth.
I think our generation, we look at things completely differently than other generations. And a lot of it, you know, has to do with technology and information and all these things. But I believe that change is coming in a lot of different ways. And some of it's going to be bad. Some of it's going to be really good. But it's really up to us now, you know, where that goes, because the current, you know, the current population of lawmakers or the current representatives that we have, most of the older ones, they're going to be living off their taxpayer-funded pensions in another 10 or 20 years.
Yes.
And then we're going to be left holding the bag trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve all these major issues? And obviously, the ideas that they have brought to the table on a lot of different things haven't worked out. And so we can't just rely on, you know, those same ideas. We have to bring fresh ideas to the table that people aren't necessarily thinking about, or that may seem like they're a little too far-fetched or too out of the box. You know, it's really the only way that we're going to solve, you know, these major issues. I mean, right now our country is in so much debt that is probably our number one national security concern. You know, outside of a lot of other things.
I have a curveball question.
Yeah.
So, see that you were running in California, right? Good old state of California.
Love Cali.
How do you feel about Texas legalizing marijuana?
Uh-oh.
Well, I think
Here we
it's
go.
definitely I think it's definitely a state issue. And, you know, as we're seeing it kind of move across the country, you know, obviously hemp is going to be a huge crop in Texas. And I personally believe in medical legalization. I think it does a lot of good, especially when you talk about like veterans with PTSD. It's shown that it's helped quite a bit when, you know, you have different types of, you know, ailments that it helps with.
Okay.
Recreational, I think it's really up to the voters or up to, you know, the states themselves. If you want to go as far as Colorado, you know, it should be voted on, and, you know, and we'll kind of see what happens. I'm not sure though how positive recreational would be, just because it's so early on in the process. We don't necessarily have, you know, enough stats to be able to say yes or no, maybe.
But as of now, Mr. Jon Hollis is not necessarily against it.
That's what I was
My grandmother, she has the ailment. She's a lot of the pharmaceutical industry. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, come on. So my grandmother, I'm getting her to get some CBD oils, and it helps.
It
They
helps.
have coffee.
It does
Yeah,
help.
and
It helps.
CBD is incredible. And
Medically,
it's done some
I'm
amazing
getting
things
my
for
mom on it
people.
too.
And obviously CBD has a much better effect medically than THC does. And so you know, CBD I think has been life-changing for a lot of people.
Yes.
But, you know, like I said, medical usage, you know, I'm all for that. I don't really see a reason why not to allow it to be a medicine. Recreational is just it's a different topic. We need to study it. We need to figure out, you know, if it's okay. And once again, it's a state's rights issue.
Right.
You know, if your state wants to do that, then that's your power. You know, you go ahead and vote and get it done.
Gotcha. What is your zodiac
Sarah?
sign?
What's that?
What's your zodiac sign?
I'm a Libra.
I knew it.
I'm glad that other Libra ain't in the house.
I knew it.
All right, Mr. Jon Hollis over here, you guys changing the narrative. All right. Well, I like to hear that though, John. And the thing about it is, with you changing the narrative, if there is 2 facts that you can give the people right now, what is something that, to catch their attention, that you are going to bring to Dallas County?
Ladies,
I need 2.
Question.
I can't give you more than that.
That Libra thinking right now.
Yeah, exactly. One, a return to honesty. We don't get a lot of that in politics these days from either side. I mean, and I've seen during my primary process, I've seen a very ugly side of the Republican Party locally, and an ugly side to candidates, and how they come at you if you're not from here. That's been a big deal that people keep hitting me on is, you're not from here. And it's like, well, get over it. There's 100,000 people moving here a year.
Get over it.
Oh my God,
like,
the traffic has picked up.
Yes.
And,
Like
and if we continue to alienate people simply because they're not from here, then we're never going to get them to side with us.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I'm a big proponent in reaching out and bringing people in, from all sides of the spectrum.
I definitely can see that because people they go for what they're used to, and if they're from home, they stay comfortable. So why not bring somebody in? I definitely love the fact of coming from somewhere else. I'm not from here, and I'm telling you, I'm coming to Dallas and making some changes.
Yep.
So
That was a friend of ours, Deanna. Yeah. She's from
Detroit.
So Detroit, what is that? Is that a
Michigan,
Yeah.
I know, but what is
Midwest.
That? Is it
Democrat or
a Democratic?
Democratic
It's
state.
pretty
So
Democratic.
she
They
wa-
did vote for Trump, though,
Her
in
question
2016.
was, coming from Detroit and then coming to Texas, it's a mentality thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going back to the original question with Democratic and Republican.
Yeah, well, I think...
Her question is how important is it when you move to a different state to think like that state?
Well, I think nowadays, especially, we're so connected that those lines are starting to get blurred in terms of like how one side thinks to another. I think there is a definite, obviously the reason why people are coming to Texas is because it's one of the best states in the nation.
Yeah.
Economically, it is incredible. The people have been extremely welcoming. There's family values. There's all these things. So there are certain things that shouldn't be changed. Absolutely. And there is a sense of like, okay, if you're, when you come here, look at why it's been so successful and make sure that you protect that. But at the same time, people are bringing their life experiences with them too. We talk about education and, maybe having people from coming from other places where they've experienced different types of education would help.
Yeah.
When you talk about healthcare, these are all national issues that we're all dealing with in the United States. When you talk about immigration, if you're coming from any border state, you've had to deal with immigration. Even New York, which isn't a border state, has to deal with massive immigration. And so there's ways that we can all work together to try to solve these issues that doesn't have anything to do with where we're from, but has to do with the experiences that we've had in our lives.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that would be best for Texas as well when it comes to immigration? Like the best way for them to handle it or for us to handle it?
In what way?
More of like a state
Yes.
decision? Because didn't the governor just announce recently that we would no longer be like accepting refugees?
Yes. He did say that.
Not because of the coronavirus or...
No.
Get your lights on.
From China, go put your mask on.
Ma'am, have you traveled to China recently?
Back up. All right, while we
Well, we should have asked you before you came. Have you been across the border?
Well, so when it comes to immigration, there's a couple of things that the federal government has to be involved in that because that has to deal with the allocation of resources as well.
Okay.
So when you have illegal immigrants come across, you don't know where to put your resources. If you know who's coming into the country, you know exactly how many resources to put.
Okay, see that.
When we look at the refugee crisis throughout the world, what we saw with Germany when they accepted, I think it was 500,000 refugees all at once, it taxed their economy so much that they had to send people back.
We're paying our taxpayer money.
Yeah.
Exactly, because you can bring people in, you can welcome them in and make sure that they're safe. But at the end of the day, you have to have a plan in place.
Yeah,
for
they got to
them
be able to
come.
join the economy
Food
that is in
stamps,
place,
Exactly.
everything that's in place.
We
Yeah.
have to learn the educational system.
Yeah.
So we have to support them to get where we're at.
And they also have to be able to be a part of our community, where they're coming from versus what we already have built
going
here.
That's
Yeah.
true.
The meshing together can definitely cause a lot of friction too. So
I
I can see
understand that weight too because I have children. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a battle. I'm like, okay, well.
I've honestly, I I never looked at it like
And we
that.
don't.
As far as resources, I'm not gonna lie. It was always
The bad side.
nobody
think
owns
about
the
it.
world. You can't draw lines
Yeah.
and tell people, but that makes sense.
Well, and think about it this way: those resources are coming from your pocket.
right.
You know,
Oh,
right.
that's your
like
that's
that.
your tax money.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the federal government doesn't make money on its own. It gets money from you.
Right.
So when we talk about all these programs that are going to be implemented and all these things that the government's going to do for us, it's taking out of your pocket
Business
to get that done.
loans.
Yes.
You know, we saw with university prices go through the roof after the government decided during the Obama administration that they were going to back all student loans. And in response to that, universities went up to $50,000 a year. You know,
They
because
did
they
get
could,
expensive.
because
Yeah.
they're not the
You're
ones
right.
covering the loans anymore. Banks
see
aren't the
that.
ones covering the loans. It's the federal government. It's you and me that are all covering those loans, and you can't because of that. You know, you can't file bankruptcy on those loans. You have to pay those back because the federal government's like, well, we need our money back.
I just got an
You
email
know.
earlier today. $100.
And I was just like,
Make my payment.
now that I think about it, it's a hard knock life out here. I don't know if I can really afford.
But I think it all goes back to what Sade constantly saying is educating ourselves. I know, speaking for me personally, I need to educate myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all do. You know, I mean, I
Definitely politics.
I just went to a school choice seminar today because I'm trying to learn as much as I possibly can about all these specific issues.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I need to, I mean, especially running for office, but just as a citizen, I want to understand the policies that everyone's putting forth so I know how to vote correctly myself. Because, you know, when you talk about, you know, kids' lives, when you talk about, you know, people's lives on healthcare, it's a big deal. You know, my grandparents right now, my grandfather is dealing with Parkinson's, and they, about halfway through the year, 3/4 of the way through the year, depending on the year, they max out on their health insurance, and so then they start coming out of pocket for it, and they've had to hire people on in order to keep him from going into, you know, some sort of medical home. They want to keep him, you know, at home so
home.
he can, you know,
Be
he can
comfortable.
spend out the rest of his life, you know, comfortable. And so when I look at healthcare, I'm looking at it from that perspective. I'm looking at it from the perspective of someone who's lost their job and lost their healthcare.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it from all these different perspectives that I've personally experienced, because the decisions that we make about these things will affect people's lives negatively and positively. And
absolutely.
we have to truly understand what those effects are. And that, you know, and it's hard to figure these things out, you know.
So speaking on being comfortable, there's been a lot of hate crime, not only just in Texas but across the states. And I want to just see what your thoughts on how you're able to make things make life better for the LGBT community, as far as, you know, legal protection benefits for them. They've been dealing with a lot. And
Yes,
they
yeah.
need help, you know, they need to
do.
be secure too.
I mean, we're seeing it in our own state party. You know, we have a group called the Log Cabin Republicans. It's all LGBT people who've come. Yeah. who-
Wow.
come-
Never
yeah.
knew that.
A lot of people don't realize that, you know, and
That's all.
and there's some of the most staunch conservatives I've ever met.
Wow.
And they're getting major pushback. They want to be recognized as an official club here in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
They
Absolutely.
are in other states. And the state party has been pushing back on them because of it, because they don't align with their family values, is what they're saying. And when I talk to those guys, they're, you know, they look at me and they go like, we're not here to change the party platform. We're not here to go against anyone's family values. At the end of the day, we want to get Republicans elected, and I
Right.
thought that's what that's what our club is supposed to do. And, you know, they're kind of keeping them out for it. So we experience it on the political side as well. And, you know, the Constitution is very simple. All men are created equal. Now, and we've changed that a little bit to all people are created equal, obviously.
I love that.
And, you know, we all have inalienable rights that are granted to us from God. And those rights are the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely.
That's very simple. You can't argue against that.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, how long has that group been a part of? How long have they been, doing this?
Yeah, well, the Log Cabin Republicans have been around nationally for 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Something we never knew.
And they are the fastest growing Republican organization in the United States.
Now, do they have that for the Democrats, or that's just in the Republicans?
I don't know. I'm sure the Democrats have their own version,
yeah.
but the log cabin Republicans are specifically Republican.
Republicans, okay.
You know, and a lot of that is, you know, they believe in conservative values. They believe in conservative policies. You know, they don't want the government coming in and taking money out of their pockets.
Okay.
You know, or as much as we can control. And what's so interesting is there's this major pushback on the state level here to keep them kind of on the edges. And yet what's funny is, you know, we'll pander for their votes, but we won't recognize them.
That's true.
And I think that's completely short-sighted. I think it's ethically wrong.
Well, we are
I can see that.
coming up to. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, we love it.
This is fun.
So
Good time.
let me ask, if you had one thing to tell the audience right now before we end, what would you tell them?
Vote during the primaries, because at the end of the day,
When is it?
March 3rd is is our primary, but this is nationwide, right?
When is the last?
Oh, hey.
And also let them know when is the last day to register to vote for it.
Yes, so the last day, that's coming up soon. It's February 3rd. If you want to vote in the primary, February 3rd is the last day that you can send in your voter registration card. That's a big deal. If you get it in after February 3rd, then you can only vote in the general. But what most people, what we see in the numbers too, is a lot of people don't come out to vote in the primaries. Mainly they don't pay attention to it, they don't really know about it, or they're not interested. And the problem with that is you get stuck with whoever gets past the primary.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the people who get past the primary are the people that are the most well connected, not necessarily the best candidate.
So your voice,
socialites.
yes. So the votes matter.
How many are running against with you? How many are you going?
There are 5 on our ticket.
Okay.
And I'm number 1 on the ballot, so it's real easy to find my name and check it. And again, that's another case where we need people to get out during the primary, because there are a couple of candidates in there that, you know, they're good people, but again, they're not focused on you. They're not focused on this community as a whole. They're focused on their own priorities. They're focused on potentially lining their own pockets, and they're really focused on the power game of it. And we have to get out of that mindset. Politically, we have to get back to serving the people. At the end of the day, we are supposed to be public servants,
Right.
and servant is a big part of that word. And you know, you hear a lot about being leaders and leading people, and that's not the job.
I have a
Per se.
question. So speaking of leading, right? Is it a special lady? You got kids? Are you the leader of your household?
Yes,
You guys, his face turned red. Look at that. He's smiling from ear to ear.
Yes, I've got a special lady in my life.
Okay.
And we like to keep her name out of things.
Understood.
I know that's
Definitely
the political realm gets a little tricky sometimes.
Understood.
Tricky, crazy. Yeah.
And,
You gotta protect.
And she likes her anonymity. She likes to stay out of it. She's just focused on doing her. And you know, I'm blessed.
That's
I'm
That's
blessed.
I like that. So, John,
blessed.
can you tell people where to find you? Your website, your Instagram?
Yes, Jon Hollis for Congress.com. That's JONHOLLIS Congress.com. Go there, check me out. You can sign up to volunteer. You can sign up to donate. We do need donations. That'll help us get some marketing materials out there. And you know, it can be any amount. It can be $5, $10, just as long as you're showing your support and showing the party really that, you know, who you're actually behind. That's really what matters. And you know, we're up against some tough competition, but not anything that I'm afraid of. That's for sure.
Yeah, I like that. He go out and go strong, you guys. So before we end the show, there is a major tragedy that occurred this week, and it's been across the billboard. So I definitely want to take the time out to take about a good 10 seconds to have a silent moment for Kobe Bryant and his daughter, the Bryant family, and anybody who was very close to him. So if you can give a good 10 seconds, you guys, we want to just have a silent.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And the whole family, yes. So we're going to take 10 seconds. All right. So just with that, you guys, just continue to pray for the Bryant family, continue to pray for anybody who was on the plane and their family. Our hearts go out to them. If they need anything and you guys can get to them, make sure you reach out and try to help the family as much as you can. We truly appreciate Jon Hollis coming in. He's a Republican running for the 32nd district.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and he's at the top of the billboard, stated by Jon Hollis.
Ballot. Personal ballot.
Yes,
Ballot.
personal ballot. So for sure, you guys, make sure you guys get out there and vote. March 3rd is the day. As he stated earlier, you can go and send your votes in by mail, or you can wait to the day and go in and vote. But do not leave. He just gave you guys education, so make sure you educate yourself on everything you want to know, and make sure go vote. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Oh, 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 oh.